Good morning. I'm Christopher Hart, Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. We are here today to brief you about the documents that we are making available this morning in the docket for our ongoing investigation of the sinking of the cargo ship El Faro in Hurricane Joaquin on October 1st, 2015. Joining me today to provide more detail about the documents are Brian Curtis, Director of NTSB's Office of Marine Safety, and Jim Ritter, Director of NTSB's Office of Research and Engineering. I would also like to acknowledge in the auditorium today Vice Chairman Bella Denzar, who is our board member on the scene of the accident, and member Earl Wayner. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of my fellow board members and the entire NTSB staff, I would like to offer our sincerest condolences to the families of the 33 crew members who were lost in this accident. We hope that our ongoing investigation will result in answers that help prevent similar accidents. We needed 3 separate missions to locate and retrieve the El Faro's Voyage Data Recorder, or VDR. First, the U.S. Navy Apache took us to the site to search for and locate the wreckage of the El Faro, but we were unable in that trip to find the VDR. On the second voyage, the research vessel Atlantis was able to locate the VDR, but could not retrieve it with the equipment available without risking damage to the recorder. In the third voyage, once again on board the U.S. Navy Apache, we successfully recovered the Voyage Data Recorder. Several organizations provided invaluable assistance to this retrieval process. They include the U.S. Coast Guard, which is our partner in every marine casualty investigation, the U.S. Navy Supervisor of Salvage and Diving, and the U.S. Navy's Military Sea Lift Command, which operate the U.S. Navy Apache. Other organizations include the National Science Foundation, which coordinated our access to the Atlantis, the platform for the second search mission, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which operates the Atlantis and the autonomous underwater vehicle Sentry that found the VDR, and the University of Rhode Island Inner Space Center, which provided secure, high-speed, high-volume video and data transmission from the sea floor to the Atlantis, then via satellite to the NTSB headquarters for analysis while the Atlantis mission was in progress. The information we have made publicly available today in the docket is a collection of factual information, including the data from the El Faro's Voyage Data Recorder and the transcript of the portions of the VDR audio recording that are pertinent to our investigation of the accident. In addition, this docket includes factual reports from our meteorological factors, engineering, and survival factors groups, and supporting materials such as interviews and documents. The factual reports of the operational, human factors, and naval architecture groups will be added to the docket at a future date. Please note that this docket is not the complete NTSB report. It contains no analysis, no statement of the probable cause of the sinking, and no recommendations to prevent similar tragedies in the future. These steps are yet to come. The entire and final factual docket, including materials that are not yet available, will be released to the public prior to the full NTSB accident report. For transparency, given the great interest in this accident, we have added these factual reports to the docket today. Furthermore, making this information available to the public allows the U.S. Coast Guard to proceed with their planning efforts for their Marine Board of Investigation, which will occur early next year. We remind you that these are factual documents only and do not yet tell the full story of the accident. The presentations you will hear should be understood in the context of the docket as we have developed it to date, and with the understanding that analysis of these facts is ongoing. Now, Director Ritter and Director Curtis will describe the contents of the docket, summarize the most important information from that content, and talk about the VDR transcription process. After that, we will be happy to take your questions. Thank you. Director Curtis.
Good morning. My name is Brian Curtis. I'm the Director in the Office of Marine Safety at the National Transportation Safety Board. I'll be briefing you on the factual reports being released today by the Office of Marine Safety. Today, the Office of Marine Safety is releasing 2 factual group reports, engineering operations and survival factors. The engineering factual report details all aspects of the engineering propulsion and electrical power generation equipment, the vessel's fuel and lubricating oil systems, and its water and piping systems. It also discusses the engineering personnel, including shoreside personnel. These survival factors reports detail the initial search effort. The survival factors report details the initial search effort beginning October 1, 2015, and the vessel's life-saving equipment, distress communications equipment on the vessel, and the function, history, and maintenance of that equipment. I would like to emphasize that these two reports are the initial reports being released by the Office of Marine Safety. There will be additional factual group reports released from our office, including nautical operations, human factors, and naval architecture, once those reports are completed. I'll now talk through in more detail the content of these two reports I just mentioned. Before we get started, I would like to reiterate that for the material being released today, that this material is purely factual, derived from the documentation collected and the interviews conducted, and does not attempt to provide any or convey any analysis or findings related to the cause of the sinking of the Faro. We'll start with the content of the engineering factual report, as I just described, but with more detail. It contains the vessel description and the history, machinery system details to include propulsion, the boilers, turbines, reduction gear sets, the electrical generation and distribution system, the fuel oil and lubricating oil systems, steering gear system, and the bilge and fire main system. I will call out from this list of items, in the transcript being released today, the bridge received a call from the engine room shortly after 4:30 the morning of the sinking regarding the vessel's list and the resulting engine equipment oil levels, the first time this concern showed up in the transcript. And secondly, also detailed in the transcript of note is that the ship lost propulsion at 06:13 that morning. More content from the engineering factual report. We have the maintenance histories for the engineering plant, including the onboard maintenance tracking program, the boiler inspection, lubricating oil analysis history, in addition, the 5 Polish citizens on board working the scope of work that they were performing for the Faro. The report details the Faro's inspection history. While under the Coast Guard safety inspection oversight, the vessel complied with an alternative compliance program where an authorized classification society, in this case the American Bureau of Shipping, conducted some of the inspections on the Coast Guard's behalf. The report covers both of these agencies' inspections, what they entailed, and exactly what the alternative compliance program consists of. The qualification process for American Bureau of Shipping surveyors is also discussed. The report identifies the most recent ABS survey was in February of 2015, and Coast Guard inspectors visited the vessel in March of 2015 and issued a certificate of inspection for the Faro, stating the vessel was fit for route and service. The report details the Faro's engineering staff, its onboard officers' complement, and their training and experience. Additionally, as I said, the report also contains shoreside engineering support, personnel job descriptions, experience, and their responsibilities in support of the vessel. It discusses the company and vessel's safety management system, which consists of detailed guidance as to how the vessel would operate on a day-to-day basis, the procedures to be followed in case of an emergency, how drilling and training is to be conducted, and general measures taken for the safe operation of the vessel. That completes the overview of the engineering factual report. The second Office of Marine Safety factual report being released today is survival factors. This report first details the timeline, assets, and efforts of the U.S. Coast Guard in searching for the Faro beginning October 1, 2015. It then discusses the onboard survival equipment, lifeboats, life rafts, immersion suits, in general, all the life-saving equipment and inventory, and the maintenance and history for all of that equipment. It It discusses the ship's emergency drills and safety meetings conducted as well. The report then goes on to cover the various emergency distress communications equipment, their functions, and their use during the accident. Those include the Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon, or EPIRB, the Global Marine Distress and Safety System, or GMDSS, and the Ship's Security Alert System, or SSAS. And finally, the report discusses lifeboat standards and regulations and the history of those. That completes the summary of the Office of Marine Factual Reports being released today, and as I said, the 3 remaining Office of Marine Factual Reports will be released pending their completion. We'll now continue with the overview of the remaining material being released in the public docket today.
Good morning. My name is Jim Ritter, and I am the Director of the Office of Research and Engineering at the NTSB. I'm going to brief you on 3 reports that are being released today: the Electronic Data Report, the Meteorology Report, and the Voyage Data Recorder Bridge Audio Transcript. This slide shows the parameters that were recorded on the Voyage Data Recorder, which is abbreviated with the letters VDR, along with data recovered from other onboard electronic systems. As shown on this slide, the following parameters were recorded. I will discuss the bridge audio information and transcript of crew conversations later in this presentation. Information from the VDR covered the final 26 hours of the voyage. The data ended at the approximate time of the sinking, and the last recorded position was very near where the wreckage of the ship was found. There were several independent sources of position tracking data for the ship, and all are in agreement, so we have a high degree of confidence in the actual position of the Faro throughout its voyage. All parameters yielded good information except for the winds experienced by the ship. Wind speed and direction should have been available from the anemometer installed on the Faro. However, the recorded data are inaccurate, and conversations captured on the bridge audio indicate that the crew of the Faro also knew that they did not have accurate wind data during the voyage. Next, I'll discuss the Meteorology Group Chairman's Factual Report. This report provides an extensive amount of information on the weather forecasts that were available during the time leading up to the accident. This slide is figure 38 from the Meteorology Report. It shows an image of Hurricane Joaquin at about 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, along with an overlay of the track of the ship in green leading up to the sinking. At the time of the sinking, about 7:40 a.m., the Faro was approximately 22 nautical miles north-northwest from the center of Hurricane Joaquin. According to a post-storm analysis by the National Hurricane Center, at the time of the sinking, Hurricane Joaquin was a Category 3 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 110 knots. There were many sources of weather information, and establishing what was likely being viewed by various members of the crew at specific times during the voyage is part of the NTSB's ongoing investigation. 2 of the primary systems of hurricane position and forecast track information used on board the Faro were the Inmarsat-C safety net system, which I'll abbreviate as SAT-C, and the Bon Voyage system, which I'll abbreviate with the letters BVS. There was a SAT-C weather terminal printer on the bridge of the Faro, and the times that it was operating could be heard on the VDR bridge audio. The crew on the bridge deck would have had access to the incoming SAT-C information when the printer could be heard, and these times are provided in the bridge audio transcript, and they're in Table 2 of the Electronic Data Factual Report, the times. The BVS system weather information was transmitted to the ship via emails to the captain's email address, and the times that those emails were sent and the times that the information in these emails was downloaded are in Table 1 of the electronic data factual report. The BVS weather information was not viewable by the crew until after it was downloaded on board the ship. The SAT-C information was text-based and would have had to have been manually plotted by the crew for visualization. The BVS information automatically provided a visual depiction of the storm's position and forecast track. SAT-C data provided position and track information on Joaquin from the National Hurricane Center that was current at the time it was sent. The BVS system provided processed storm position and track information based on data released by the Hurricane Center about 6 hours prior. This slide is figure 66 from the group chairman's factual report. It shows a comparison of the hurricane's location and forecast track. The SAT-C weather data, shown in red, was likely transmitted to the bridge about 10:54 p.m. when the sound of the SAT-C printer could be heard on the VDR recording. The BVS weather data, shown in blue, was emailed to the captain's email address about 11:04 p.m. on the night before the accident. As can be seen in this slide, these data show different locations and forecasted tracks for the storm. The green dotted line in the upper left corner of the slide shows El Faro's track and position at 11:06 p.m., and that's in the lower image on the slide in the upper left corner. Again, there were many sources of weather information, and establishing what the crew was using at specific times is part of the ongoing investigation. Next, I'll discuss the Voyage Data Recorder audio transcript group chairman's factual report. The NTSB convened a VDR group to prepare a transcript of the crew conversations and sounds heard on the recording. The group was led by an NTSB recorder engineer and included technical experts who are experienced mariners. The VDR group consisted of staff from the NTSB, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Tote Services, the owner of the El Faro. The entire 26-hour audio recording was reviewed many times. Much of the time, there is no crew conversation that can be heard, and often what is said is not related to the condition or the operation of the ship. The VDR group determined that about 10 hours of the recording contained audio information that was pertinent to the investigation. And this is the extent of what was transcribed. Time periods that were not transcribed are listed as areas of non-pertinent conversation or no conversation. The El Faro VDR transcript is more than 500 pages long and is the longest transcript report ever produced by the NTSB. The transcript required more than 1,100 work hours to complete. There are 108 time periods that were transcribed. Each time period provides a description of all the sounds and words that were discernible by the group during that period, with the exception of the names of the individuals. The voices of 9 individual crew members were identified as speakers in the audio transcript, and the job title of each speaker is listed in the legend at the beginning of the transcript and throughout the body of the report. The recording consisted of 3 channels of audio collected from 6 different microphones on the bridge deck of the ship. Unfortunately, the VDR recording from the El Faro was characterized as poor quality, and it contains high levels of background noise. This is not all that unusual with VDRs because the bridge deck is a metal room and the sound echoes. Vibrations on the ship and blowing air and ventilation ducts can all be picked up on the microphones. Crew members can also walk around the bridge and not be very close to the microphones when they are speaking. The recording was filled with non-voice sounds of a ship operating at sea, and audio quality degraded after the ship encountered the storm. In some areas, the exact content of crew conversations could not be determined. Extensive digital audio filtering was needed to enhance the recording, and some crew statements were reviewed more than 100 times by the VDR group. Sounds of the SAT-C weather printer on the bridge were captured on the recording, and the content of these weather reports are provided in the NTSB Meteorology Group Chairman's Factual report. Specific crew discussions were heard regarding weather information downloaded from the BVS system emails, and the content of these weather reports are also provided in the Meteorology Factual report. This slide shows the point in the Voyage where the VDR bridge audio recording begins, which was about 5:37 a.m. on September 30th, 2015. This was about 8 hours after the ship departed Jacksonville, when it was approximately 150 miles southeast of the city. During the morning of September 30th, the captain and chief mate discussed the forecasted weather and agreed on a course diversion that they believed would keep them sufficiently clear of the eye of the storm. Throughout the daylight hours of September 30th, multiple conversations regarding weather and route planning were recorded, and these are contained in the transcript. This slide shows the location of the ship and the storm about 8 p.m. on September 30th, the evening before the accident. At about the same time, the recording indicates that the captain had left the bridge for the evening. About 11:05 p.m., the third mate was on watch on the bridge. He called the captain's cabin and informed him that the latest weather forecast had come in, and they discussed the information. Note that the VDR recording only captures persons speaking on the bridge during a phone call. The person on the other end of the line is not recorded. During the phone call, the third mate mentioned the current forecasted movement of the storm and its expected proximity to the ship's course. He offered to get more information for the captain and then call him back. About 11:14 p.m., the third mate called back and informed the captain that he estimated that at 4 a.m. they would be 22 miles from the center of the hurricane, and he indicated that the storm's maximum winds were forecast to be 100 nautical miles per hour. During the phone call, the third mate suggested to the captain that they could head south at 2 a.m. to get more distance from the storm. After the phone call ended, the third mate indicated to another crew member on the bridge that the captain seemed to think that they would be south of the storm and the winds would not be an issue, and the ship's planned course did not change. About 11:45 p.m., the second mate arrived on the bridge for the upcoming watch and was briefed by the third mate. The deteriorating weather conditions and the ship's course were discussed, and the third mate left the bridge about 12:01 a.m. on the morning of the sinking. About 1:01 a.m., the second mate called the captain and mentioned the weather and potentially altering the ship's course south. Some of the words spoken by the second mate during this call could not be determined. After the phone call with the captain ended, the second mate indicated to another crew member on the bridge that the captain wanted to stay on the planned course. This slide shows the location of the ship and the storm about 2 a.m. During the early morning watch on October 1st, the bridge crew discussed the increased pitch and roll motion of the ship. As the morning progressed, the sounds of objects, possibly ship's cargo or structure, were heard shifting and falling in the vicinity of the bridge. About 4:10 a.m., the captain returned to the bridge, and it appears that except for 2 brief periods during the first 30 minutes, he remained on the bridge until the end of the VDR recording. About 4:37 a.m., the chief mate received a phone call from the chief engineer regarding the vessel's list and engine oil levels, which appears to be the first time that these issues were discussed. The chief mate relayed this information to the captain. This slide shows the location of the ship starting early on the morning of the accident, and it includes interpolated positions of the hurricane at 1-hour intervals. It also shows the location where the VDR was found on the ocean floor at a depth of about 15,000 feet. About 5:03 a.m., the captain and chief mate discussed getting current weather information. Over the next few minutes, the captain could be heard stating that they were getting conflicting reports on where the center of the storm was, that they were on the backside of the storm, and he seemed to indicate that the lack of visibility was causing a problem in knowing which way to steer the vessel. About 5:12 a.m., the alternate chief engineer stated that he had never seen the ship with such a list. Over the next several minutes, there was a discussion of the ship's sail area and the effect of its list on engine oil levels. Later discussions indicated that the ship was apparently listing to starboard at this time. About 5:43 a.m., the captain took a phone call and then indicated that there was a problem in the number 3 hold of the ship. He sent the chief mate down below, and they discussed suspected flooding over the UHF radio. This appears to be the first mention of flooding on the ship. There were numerous discussions between crew on the bridge and crew in other areas of the ship about the possible cause of the flooding, about pumping out water, and about transferring water from the starboard to port ramp tanks to help correct the list. About 5:53 a.m., the captain was on the phone and said that he was going to turn the ship to port to get a list on the other side of the ship. He then ordered rudder to left 20. About 6:13 a.m., the captain indicated that the vessel had lost propulsion. For the remainder of the recording, there were numerous discussions related to the ship's flooding condition, attempts to rectify the ship's list, and attempts to regain propulsion. About 6:32 a.m., the second mate began formatting a distress message on the ship's global maritime distress and safety system, which was at a console on the bridge, and this was done at the instruction of the captain. About 7:07 a.m., the captain notified the company's designated shoreside representative of the critical situation and that he was preparing to send an electronic distress signal on the ship security alert system. About 7:13 a.m., the captain instructed the second mate to send the distress message, and a high-frequency tone consistent with its activation was heard on the recording. About 7:27 a.m., the captain gave the command to ring the ship's general alarm, which was then heard on the recording. About 7:29 a.m., the second mate exclaimed that there were containers in the water, and the captain gave the command to ring the abandoned ship alarm, which was then heard on the recording. About 7:31 a.m., the captain relayed over the UHF radio to put the life rafts in the water. The audio recording ended about 7:40 a.m. with the captain and one of the helmsmen still present on the bridge. This concludes the information about the transcript and the other reports that I've mentioned today, and we will now answer questions about the reports placed in the public docket at this time.
Could you stand up and speak into the microphone, please? Is that microphone alive? Sorry, Tom.
That's quite all right.
Thank you.
Good morning, it's Tom Costello from NBC News. Could you put that one more time into layman's terms? As we heard you describe the conflicting weather information, do we understand correctly that the captain was going off of old data that was being emailed to him, while on the bridge they were getting a feed of new weather data that was you could only see if it was printed out on the printer? Is that accurate? Is that where the conflicting information came from?
Mr. Ritter?
If you could go into some detail just explaining how these two systems were in conflict. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, the SAT-C weather terminal, we can hear that on the audio recording when it's printing. And we correlated the times that it's printing with the information from the electronic data factual report. So we can correlate the sounds on the audio transcript with the known times that the information was relayed to the ship. The issue, though, of exactly what information was available to the different crew members is still under investigation. One of the important things to remember is that the SAT-C weather information is text-based information. So to understand it better, you need to actually manually plot the data to see the ship's position relative to the position of the hurricane in the forecast track. The BVS weather information actually provides a visual depiction. It provides a map or a graphic of the position of the storm and its forecasted track when the information is downloaded from the email. So one of the question is really different information is available to people on the bridge and via the captain's email address, and so that is part of the investigation, and it's quite a bit of investigation is needed to make a determination about what a specific individual was looking at in terms of weather information at any specific time. That's part of the investigation.
To be clear, these two pieces of data were in conflict.
I'm sorry, Tom, we need to have you on the microphone so that everybody can hear it.
Sorry about that. But to be clear, these two pieces of weather data that were streaming in were in conflict. One was more outdated than the other?
Yeah, there was about a 6-hour offset in time between the currency of the data. Between SAT-C was current at the time it was sent, and the BVS information was processed and based on information about 6 hours prior. Both sets of information were based on information from the National Hurricane Center, but there was a 6-hour time delay in the BVS information.
Lorena Inclan, I'm with Action News in Jacksonville, Florida. Is there still anything being worked on the VDR as we speak?
The Voyage Data Recorder activity is completed. The Voyage Data Recorder group has completed the transcript of the audio recording, and that is being released on the public docket today. There's also an electronic data group chairman's report that has all the electronic information, the parametric data from the Voyage Data Recorder, and that is also being released on the public docket today.
And a follow-up question, is there anything on the recording that is not being publicly released today?
I believe I noted in my remarks that there was about 10 hours worth of information out of the 26 hours that the VDR group believed was pertinent to the investigation, and that 10 hours of information is what the transcript entails.
Thank you.
Let me just add to that the law permits us only to release the information that's pertinent to the investigation.
Chris Parento, News4 Jackson, Jacksonville, Florida. Was there any indication on the bridge from the captain that any of the crew were able to deploy lifeboats or get into immersion suits as the ship was going down?
The transcript talks towards the end about the abandoning of the vessel, and they talk about going to deploying the life rafts, but there's not a lot of discussion beyond that, basically to get to the life rafts and put them in the water.
Any discussion about the immersion suits or life preservers or anything like that on board?
At some point, I believe, you'll see the transcript, they talked about life jackets on the bridge, but as far as immersion suits, I don't recall any discussion of immersion suits in the transcript.
Thank you.
Chris Van Cleve from CBS News. Would the captain, or should the captain have been aware that the data that was being emailed to him was on a 6-hour delay compared to what was being sent to the bridge?
That's part of the investigation. That's a difficult question to answer, but that's being looked at as part of the ongoing investigation.
But speaking generally, would a captain be aware that the data that's being sent to him is 6 hours old compared to the data that has to be manually plotted up on the bridge? Is that something that would be common knowledge?
I'm sorry, I don't think we're ready to speculate on what the captain might have known or didn't know.
Well, but speaking in general, is that something, I'm not a sea captain, I don't steer big ships. Is that something that if I'm a captain that I would know or should know, or is that, or would that be common knowledge that one is more up-to-date raw data and the other has been processed and analyzed and is coming to you at a delay?
Yeah, I think we've answered the question. It is part of the investigation. It's part of the ongoing investigation, and we're definitely looking at that issue.
Okay. The other thing, can you characterize the state of the captain and the other folks on the bridge as things were unraveling there? Was this calm? Like when you hear, for example, pilots in an emergency situation, the level of calm on those recorders is remarkable. How would you describe sort of the atmosphere, what you were hearing as far as the way they were reacting?
At this point, we'd be reluctant to offer any qualitative descriptions of the nature of the. We're now just reporting the facts. The investigation will probably get us further into the qualitative nature of what was happening on the bridge at the time, but we're not prepared to.
And just to make sure that
yet.
I'm clear, when the third mate was calling the captain, he was talking about the SAT-C weather data that was coming over the printer when he called him?
Again, that's part of the investigation, but one of the things that you can do is you can look at the transcript and correlate the times that the printer can be heard on the audio transcript, or that the printer can be heard on the audio. You can correlate that to the actual information in the meteorology report and the times that the information was sent, which is in the electronic data report. I believe I mentioned in tables 1 and 2. So that is still part of the investigation as far as exactly what information was being sent to the bridge at particular times, but I believe the information that we've released today provides you enough to have quite a bit of insight into that.
And so, just to translate that a little bit for,
Right.
for those of us who aren't investigators, it seems like there is a correlation between when the SAT-C data came in and when the third mate or the second mate called the captain. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's in the transcript. He calls the captain not long after we can hear the sound of the SAT-C printer.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to walk back to the previous question about the immersion suits. As I recall now, there was some discussion at about the time they talked about abandoning the vessel to going to the rooms and collecting the immersion suits, but I wouldn't want to characterize it beyond that.
We're not trying to be circuitous with our answers. We're just trying to stick to the facts. The analysis will occur in the course of the investigation.
So I hope you don't mind one last clarification on this, just because, that's not my thing to be on the bridge of a ship like this. A SAT-C data to the bridge, to be clear, that's the text-based data that then would need to be plotted out, correct? Versus the BDS data, which is a much more analyzed and full picture that, am I correct, would include like a common charting and maps and color coded and everything else like we see on a contemporary weather picture? Your mic just died for some reason.
The SAT-C information is tabular data. It's text information, so latitude, longitude for the storm would need to be plotted on a chart. And the BVS information is graphical. It also provides tabular data, but it has graphical depiction of the storm location and track.
So can you describe what they were heading into, the size of the storm, and what they were up against? Oops, you're gone again.
You can, I believe the meteorology report with attachments is over 2,000 pages long. So there's a tremendous amount of information on the weather that they were up against, and that's detailed in the Meteorology Group Chairman's Factual Report.
But without going through 2,000 pages of us, can you give us a summary? What were they up against that morning?
Well, I think the graphics tell a story pretty convincingly that there was a major storm in the area, and that's one of the things that we're looking at as part of the investigation.
Could any ship that size have weathered that size of a storm?
Well, ships do transit through hurricanes. The one distinguishing feature here particularly is the loss of propulsion. So that certainly puts them in a very defensive situation, but I hate to characterize what they should and should not have gone through. but certainly they lost propulsion, which was created huge challenges to the vessel.
By losing propulsion, what did that do to them? How does that complicate or doom them?
Well, by having propulsion, you can, your propeller, you can position yourself to put yourself nose into the storm or configure yourself the most advantageous to the storm. But once you lose propulsion, lose the propeller, lose the vessel, lose the ability to maneuver yourself, you're at the mercy of the seas and the wind.
I believe around, you said around 4:10 a.m., there was loud crashing noises. Any way to characterize, if at all possible, what that may have been?
I believe the statement really is more general in nature, that as the weather conditions grew worse, that there were the sound of objects falling and structure or cargo shifting. It's not associated with a particular time of the morning. It's a progressive situation as the ship entered the storm and progressed.
So it could be a mixture between things on the vessel and also the weather conditions.
Yes, there's comments on the recording about the weather conditions and that the ship was experiencing, and we can hear many sounds on the recording.
Also, a follow-up question. Earlier in the investigation, the NTSB had said that they would be able to determine eventually what happened on the Voyage without the VDR. Knowing what you know now, do you still believe that?
Well, certainly, having the BDR now in our possession for use is very huge in the investigation for us to learn from the events and the circumstances and derive more analysis. So certainly having the BDR is a large step in a positive direction investigatively.
Can you just go over the time? It's Chris from CBS News again. Can you go over the times again where course corrections were discussed? Was it 2 a.m. and 4 a.m.? Was it 11:30 when the third mate suggested making a course alteration at 2 a.m.? Could you just run us back through that? I got a little bit behind.
At 11:05 p.m., the third mate was on watch on the bridge, and he called the captain's cabin and informed him that the latest weather forecast had just come in, and they discussed the information. He offered to get a little more information, and at 11:14, he called him back. The second phone call was to the captain, or that was two phone calls by the third mate, and then there was another phone call at about 1:01 a.m. where the second mate called the captain, and they discussed the weather and potentially altering the ship's course south. And that less information was available on that second phone call, and that's noted in the transcript that it was difficult to determine exactly what words were being spoken.
Go ahead. So there were two calls. The 11:14 call, the third mate indicated that, asked if they wanted to change course around 2 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there were two calls
Yes.
then about
The third mate
course.
made two calls. At 11:05 p.m., called the captain and offered to get more information, and called back at 11:14 with additional information, and that's where he estimated that at 4 a.m. they would be 22 miles from the center of the hurricane. And he did mention, during the phone call, the third mate suggested to the captain that they could head south at 2 a.m. to get more distance from the storm.
Is 22 miles too close to a hurricane? Is that real close for a ship to be?
I'm not going to get into speculation on a question like that.
But would that be typical? Would you normally put a tanker ship that close to a hurricane? It sounds close to me, but I don't do ships.
As Director Ritter said, we wouldn't want to get into that because there are a lot of dynamics that go into decisions and what's right and what's wrong. So we're not going to comment on that at this point.
Is there any evidence that the captain knew that, in fact, his weather data that he was going off of was 6 hours old, or should he have known that his weather data was 6 hours old, and that things could change dramatically in that period of time?
Again, that's part of the investigation, and I know there's 2,000 plus pages in the Meteorology Group Chairman's Factual Report. That's the factual information. There will also be an analytical phase to the investigation, and the meteorology group will look at that issue.
Let me add that the analytical phase will include a lot of these questions that you're asking now about what was typical in the industry, what happens with ships of various sizes in certain proximity to storms, things like. We'll be looking at the overall picture, because that will get into the analytical phase, which will address some of the judgmental issues.
You mentioned the possibility that some of those noises could have been the cargo containers breaking free or crashing. Is there any possibility that that could have been a fracturing of the hull of the ship?
Well, once again, I think you're getting into, the analysis of and what may or may not have occurred. We're just stating today the facts as we know them and what they heard for noises.
That will also be addressed in the final analysis as we dig deeper into what were we hearing, what did the sounds indicate, what did they say, who responded how to what actions. That will be part of the ultimate analysis.
I apologize, one clarification. You said around 2 a.m. the captain, one of the mates requested permission to move the ship around 2 a.m. so they could be south of the storm. Can you clarify if they ended up moving south at that point? Is it heard at all?
Yeah, the second mate called at 1:01 a.m. and also discussed altering the ship's course. And after that phone call ended, the second mate indicated to another crew member on the bridge that the captain wanted to stay on the planned course, and the course did not change.
Okay, so it did not change at 2 a.m. And
Correct.
one more thing. I want to be as sensitive as possible here with this question, but you mentioned at the very end that when the recording ended, that the captain and one of the helmsmen was still on board. Any way you can tell us, or was still on board when the recording ended? Any way you can tell us if anyone else was still on board when the recording ended?
The transcript, the VDR group felt that those were the only two people on the bridge. Those were the only two people that were captured speaking on the bridge. It probably would not be 100% determined, but those were the two people that were speaking when the recording ended.
Absent a video image of what was happening on the bridge, we would not be able to tell from the voice recording unless we heard people or heard people referenced right there. We would not be able to tell who was on the bridge at that time.
Well, unless we have any further questions.
Knowing what you know now, and respecting you can't talk about making recommendations at this point, but do any of you have concerns with the overall operation of the maritime industry?
Our objective is to determine what caused this crash. We are not doing a general overall audit of the industry, so we will not be in a position to comment on that. We're just basically looking at what caused this accident and what can be done to try to prevent it from happening again.
So you mentioned 500 pages of in the transcription. I mean, that's having covered the NTSB for 12 years. That's astonishing amount of information. Can you characterize the mood, the tone on the bridge as they were dealing with this emergency?
Well, I can say that it is unprecedented, the length of this recording, 26 hours that was reviewed as part of the NTSB's investigation. Normally with voice recordings in operating compartments of vessels, or in the case of aviation, the maximum time is 2 hours of the recording. So in this case, it was a tremendous amount of information to review, and as you can see from the transcript, we have crew that are actively dealing with the issues that they're up against, and regarding the listing, the flooding, the loss of propulsion, and that is detailed in the transcript. And we did not, that's fully to the extent that the conversations were intelligible and discernible. All of those conversations are in the transcript.
Just a quick follow-up, I hope you don't mind. When you read a transcript, it's one thing to read the words, but to hear the tenor, to hear whether they were panicked, whether they were matter of fact, whether they were, their overall state of mind or the tone on the bridge. Can you just equate what it was like? Can you give us a sense? You're the only ones having heard that the actual recordings, and I know you don't release those. So we're just wondering, what was the overall feeling on the bridge?
There's a legend in the beginning of the transcript that notes all the speakers, their positions, and all the nomenclature or abbreviations that are used. Exclamations, an expression of exclamation is noted in the legend. So a lot of that information is relayed in the transcript. When the transcript is read, it helps to get that legend separate from the transcript so it can be referred to frequently as you read the transcript and have it to the side, and so that way you can quickly identify who is speaking, and it assists in reviewing the information. It is a tremendous amount of information to review. It takes quite a bit of time to go through it in a methodical way.
To the extent we can make some determination about the mood in the moment, that will be part of the analysis that we will be conducting. That's difficult to do with reliability, but we will, to the extent we can reliably do that, we will do that in the analysis.
That concludes today's press briefing. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Again, all of the documents that have been discussed here today are available in the docket. That link again is http://go.usa.gov/X as in X-ray, the numeral 8, P as in Papa, the numeral 9, and J as in Juliet. Thank you very much.